Good morning, colleagues. I hope everyone's having a great summer. Thank you for joining us this morning for a webinar coming from ICCR. Really quickly, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Meg Jones-Montero, and I'm the Program Director for Health Equity here at ICCR, but I work very closely in tandem with ShareEx on our evaluation efforts, and that's kind of what we're focusing on today. I'm pleased to welcome you all to this webinar that's actually launching ICCR's engagement trackers. However, before we dive into this, I had two housekeeping items that I wanted to go over before we start. One, as I'm sure you saw, this webinar is being recorded, so participants will be able to revisit it after today. In addition to that, all of your lines have been muted during the webinar. However, we will be unmuting your lines to ask questions. And please note too, that if you have a question about anything that's being presented, you can enter that in the Q&A box. And Sahar will be stopping once in a while to kind of pause to solicit questions from all of you all. Lastly, I wanted to just really kind of give you a little bit of context of why we're offering this webinar right now. As you know, over the past year, we've made significant investments in ShareEx. And the reason for that is that we're really trying to figure out how we can develop mechanisms within this database to help you all track the impact of your engagements with companies. There's a couple of things that we've already launched. One of the things that we did launch already was embedding 7 of the issue-based corporate benchmarks into our company profiles that you can now find on ShareEx. These benchmarks essentially offer an objective measure. So it's an external third-party assessment of how companies are doing on certain ESG issues. The second thing that we launched this year was the company report cards. And those company report cards give you a sense of collectively or holistically how the company at large is actually performing on different issues. Today, we're launching what's called ICCR's engagement trackers. Some of you who've been part of the working group calls have already sort of taken a look at these, as well as those who have done some user testing with us. Now, these engagement trackers are designed to really look at progress across shareholder engagement with one company. So an example is Pepsi on one issue, which would be pesticides over time. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to ShareEx, who is our Director of Evaluation, and she is going to introduce these trackers. She's going to explain sort of our reasoning and rationale for why we developed them. And then she's also then going to go through or outline, delineate ways in which we envision you all using these trackers. So with that, I hand it over to Sahar.
Thank you so much, Meg. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this preview of ICCR's engagement trackers. I'd like to begin by sharing our rationale for building these engagement trackers. When we were envisioning a new evaluation tool, we were looking to build something that would go beyond resolutions and capture the impact of all shareholder actions. The bulk of ICCR's engagement tends to be dialogue-led, and we have some ways to go in meaningfully capturing the impact of progress made through shareholder dialogues. So that was in the front of our mind. We also wanted to create an evaluation criteria that was broad enough to be relevant across issues, but also meaningful enough for us to capture progress within program areas. We needed it to be simple and easy to understand so that our members could use and interpret it. Another important consideration was building a tool that would evaluate progress over time, that would capture the depth of the engagement and go beyond the year-on-year nature of an AGM cycle. We were also interested in not just capturing corporate progress, but also investor support for certain ESG issues. And we wanted a tool which could help us capture the changing nature of investor asks over time, whether this is influenced by growing investor consciousness, by company progress, by the threat of SEC challenges, or emerging ESG issues. So what we came up with was an engagement tracker. An engagement, as many of you know, in shareholder exchange is defined as working with one company on one issue. ICCR members can work with a company on multiple issues. For example, as Meg mentioned, we work with Pepsi on pesticides, on nutrition, on governance, on climate change, and each of these is organized as a separate engagement. An engagement ask is a specific shareholder request that is clearly articulated so the company understands what actions they're expected to take, and we can track progress towards the company fulfilling that request. It's similar to the resolve clause of your resolution. What the engagement tracker does is that it connects those shareholder asks to shareholder actions, resolutions, dialogues, letters, etc., and then records company response to each ask. This company response is then assessed on a 4-point scale. The 4-point scale is 1, the company is not responsive to shareholder ask. 2, the company is continuing to engage on the annual ask. 3, the company committed to make changes to corporate policy or practice in response to ask. Or 4, the company actually made changes to corporate policy or practice in response to ask. This scale will be familiar to many of you as we tested it in working groups and also one-on-one with some of our members. We adopted this scale because we thought it would be clear and easy to understand. It could be applied across all program areas and could be used to judge progress across shareholder actions, resolutions, dialogues, letters. And it offered a simple yet meaningful way of measuring progress. Now, the best way for me to demonstrate the usefulness of the assessment scale is to actually show you an engagement tracker. But before I do that, I wanted to just offer a quick disclaimer. The trackers you're going to see today have been populated by ICCR staff based on the information currently in ShareEx. All investors will have an opportunity to edit these in partnership with the engagement coordinators, and I'll be sharing some information on how you can do that during the webinar today. So if we begin by looking at AbbVie's engagement on pharma pricing and access. When you go to the engagement page, the first tab shows you all the actions with the company. So you'd have to click into each year to see what dialogues and resolutions were filed by members, what the ask was, what the outcome was. What the tracker does is place all of this in an easy to read format in one table. The tracker is located on the 3rd tab of all engagement pages. It starts off by explaining the 4-point scale, and then it has 5 columns. The first column says the year of the ask. The second column explains the ask. This is similar to the resolve clause, but in a dialogue-led engagement, it would be the objective of the dialogue. It connects that to all shareholder actions, whether they be resolutions or dialogues that were used to communicate this ask in this AGM year. So as you see, this is the 2021 ask, and the dialogue in December 2020 counts in the 2021 AGM year, and then records company response to that ask. And finally, it assesses that company response on the 4-point scale. The assessment is color-coded to make for easy reading, so you can see year over year how the company has been responding to shareholder asks on this issue of pharma pricing. So in 2021, you see that the investors approached the company to report on how drug pricing risks were being incorporated into executive compensation. And they had filed a resolution and had a dialogue, the result of which was the company agreed to include the investors' language in the proxy. But what the tracker shows us is this engagement began in 2017. When ICCR members first approached AbbVie about disclosing on the rationale for drug pricing increases. The company challenged that proposal as being ordinary business and had it omitted. The following year, in light of that SEC challenge and recognizing the link between senior executive incentives and increases in drug pricing, members changed their ask to ask the company to report annually on the extent to which public concern over drug pricing strategies was integrated into AbbVie's incentive compensation policies, plans, and programs for senior executives. They held a dialogue and filed a resolution. The company tried to challenge it under ordinary business, but this time, because the ask had been amended, they were not successful, and the resolution achieved 21.8% of the vote. Members continued to file the resolution in 2019 and 2020, increasing investor support to almost 25%. And each year they had a dialogue which showed that AbbVie had done nothing to address the investor concerns regarding executive incentives, and the company remained resistant to investor asks despite being hammered during the Senate Finance Committee hearing. So when they approached almost 25% in vote threshold, the following year, the company agreed to include language in the proxy. What the engagement tracker really does is helps connect all shareholder actions over time and tell the story of that engagement. It, as you see, is able to capture investor support as well as company response and changing investor ask. At the bottom of the tracker, there is a space for engagement coordinators to share additional comments on the engagement. This can be something forward-looking, like despite the commitment, the company has not done this or has committed to do more. In this case, I've added something from the Access to Medicine's 2021 index, which states that AbbVie does not demonstrate having access-related incentives for senior executives in country managers or in-country managers. Below the engagement tracker, we also have the benchmarks that we embedded. We embedded 7 benchmarks. AbbVie is ranked on 2 of them, and you can see on the Access to Medicine Index, it's ranked 17 out of 20. And on CDP, it has the same score as the previous year, which is a B. So this tracker is in one way giving you an assessment, an investor assessment based on our internal performance indicators of how the company is doing on this ask, whereas the benchmarks below it give you third-party verification of the company's performance on some of these issues. Engagement trackers are also useful in understanding the depth of an engagement. I'm going to share another tracker with you. Sorry. This is the Exxon tracker engagement on political contributions. And this will show you a little bit about the depth of the engagement. You see in 2021, ICCR members filed with the company on political contributions, and this achieved 30.5% of the vote. What the tracker shows you is the same ask had been filed on for the last 5 years, starting in 2017, with growing investor support from 2019. But the engagement goes back even further. In the early 2000s, members were filing on the connection between political contributions and global warming, and all the way back to 1976, when members first asked the company to disclose its international political contributions and achieved 2.9% of the vote. Yet, despite consistent and persistent filing on this issue and engagement, it seems that Exxon has not been responsive to shareholder ask. And you can see that this engagement has been going on for almost 50 years. Some engagement trackers help us see the depth of an engagement by showing how new asks are connected to or have roots in historical ICCR member engagement. One such example is the engagement with KeyCorp on predatory fair lending, which in 2021, members filed a resolution on asking the company to assess the racial impact of its overdraft policies and practices. And the company agreed, among other things, to a product gap assessment and evaluation of the racial equity impact of overdraft policies and practices. But as you can see, this was not the first time that members have been engaging with the company. All the way back in 2004, members did reach out to the company to ask for oversight to ensure that no loan originated or purchase is entailed by predatory practices. That resolution was withdrawn for agreement, but we don't have the withdrawal criteria, so we can't really know what the company agreed to. Here, I'd just like to make a plug for how important it is for understanding company progress, understanding our impact for us to be able to record the withdrawal criteria. I'm going to stop and see if we have any questions before I show any more engagement trackers. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A box.
Sahar, I think you can keep going. I don't see any questions.
Okay. And another important use for the engagement trackers is the ability to be able to capture growing investor support for an ESG issue. I'm going to draw your attention to this engagement with Vertex Pharmaceuticals on lobbying. And you can see that this year, the company, in response to a resolution filed, agreed to disclose the non-deductible portion of all payments to 501c14 organizations. But as you see, the same ask had been filed from 2017 onwards. And you can see growing investor support, where it achieved 26.95% of the vote in 2017, 30.5% in 2018, and then 32.3% in 2019. So you're seeing successive increases in investor support for this ask until the refiling in 2021 led to the agreement with the company. This is an example of a company that our members have been filing the same ask on year, but sometimes asks, as you see, can change, showing that perhaps there's an SEC challenge that requires the ask to be more clearly defined because there are new issues that come up, or because there's less investor support for the issue that the original ask was making. I think I see some questions. I want to make sure that I don't go too far ahead before.
Yeah, Frank has a question. I can read it to you, Sahar. So essentially, the examples show progress based on resolutions. What about dialogues?
Yes, so the AbbVie example showed you that it's not just through resolutions, it's also through dialogues. So I can go back to that. Here in the engagement tracker, you can see that whereas we do have examples from where the vote percentage is increasing, but where you're seeing the company response, this information is being taken from the dialogue notes. The dialogue confirmed that AbbVie had done nothing to address investor concerns. And then in the dialogue, they realized that, that shareholders were committed to holding the line on executive incentive resolutions. So where we do have dialogue notes, we're able to pull that. We are not as far ahead as we would like to be in recording dialogues. And I'd like to make that easier for members. Basically, to enter a dialogue into ShareEx, you need 4 pieces of information. You need the date, the lead, most importantly, the key takeaways. This is what's pulled into the company report card and also what helps us populate the engagement trackers and the objectives. If you have minutes for the dialogue, those are also useful to have, but not necessary. I cannot see the question, sorry. So I don't know if there's another question.
No, just to comment that this is amazing. There is one question from Raymond though, about the pathway on the website. Like, how do you find or start the engagement tracker? So that was one ask, but other than that, you're good.
That's a good question. So if you go into ShareEx and you go on the top, on the top where it says engagements, resolutions, dialogues. You can find the engagement that you're interested in. For example, if we were looking at AbbVie and pharma pricing and access, you click into that engagement. And as I showed you, the first tab shows you all the actions, but the third tab shows you the engagement tracker. And in the same tab, right below the engagement tracker, you will see the company performance on external benchmarks. As of now, you have to press next to see the successive years, but we are trying to work on functionality that will allow you to print the tracker in one go. So when you're going into dialogue, you have all the notes with you. And I want to share one more example of an engagement tracker which shows growing investor support for an issue. This is the engagement with Mondelez on reducing plastics use, which in 2021 led to a resolution being withdrawn for agreement when the company set a virgin plastic reduction target for 2025, among other things. But as the engagement tracker shows you that members have been engaging with this company from 2015 onwards, and they've been growing the investor support for the ask on environmental impacts of non-recyclable packaging from 27.9% in 2015 to 31.2% in 2018, until the company eventually committed to setting the plastic reduction target. So we've seen examples of how the engagement tracker is able to capture the impact of resolutions and dialogues, how it's able to show the depth of engagement, whether that is consistently asking for the same thing from the same company, or whether it's a new ask that connects to previous historical asks by members, how it's able to show growing investor support for an ESG ask. But engagement trackers are also useful in helping you see company progress and document commitments made by companies. I'm going to share an example of the engagement with Core Civic on human rights, which in 2019, members first approached the company to integrate detainee rights risks into the executive compensation for senior executives. And although the company first challenged the proposal at the SEC as being substantially implemented, they eventually agreed to make a statement at the AGM and help organize a site visit for investors. The following year, members went back to the company asking them to include human rights expertise on their board, and the company agreed to add language to its board membership criteria that directors have human rights experience. And this year, members asked the company to conduct a racial equity audit, analyzing their impacts on non-white stakeholders and communities of color. And the company is committed to completing the audit and publishing the findings before January 2022. So you see in this fourth column of company response, the commitments made by the company. And you also see how the investor ask has changed over time as they're trying to address the human rights risks from different angles. Another example of documenting company progress and changing investor ask is the engagement tracker with McDonald's on antibiotics, which shows that in 2016, when members began to file on phasing out the routine use of antibiotics, they were able to grow investor support from 26.3% to 30.9% until in 2018, the company actually committed to continued dialogue and to publicly announcing an antibiotic use policy for beef purchased by its US restaurants. Members filed a resolution again the following year, and this time the company agreed to publish the findings of its report and update its antibiotic policy for pork. This year, the ask has been different. Members have asked the company to report on the external costs of antimicrobial resistance, and it seems that they achieve 11.9% of the vote, as this is a new ask. Just as engagement trackers can help us see company progress and company commitments, they can also help us see company resistance to ESG asks. And I didn't mean to, but this is another Exxon example on corporate governance. This is the engagement with Exxon on CEO and chair separation, which this year achieved 22.1% of the vote, but in 2019 achieved 40.7% of the vote. And you see the same ask is being repeated back all the way to 2007. And members first approached the company on this issue in 2004. And at that time, they achieved 27.1% of the vote. And the additional comments, it says that CHRB 2020 scores Exxon 2 out of 8 on its governance policy and commitments to human rights. So investors have a reason to think that the company needs some ways to go on its governance issues. Sometimes engagement trackers can also help us document an evolution in company understanding of its role and responsibility on an issue. In this case, I'm going to share with you an engagement tracker on the Rite Aid engagement on tobacco. And you see when you read the tracker that in 2014, the company in a dialogue explained that they don't really see themselves just as a pharmacy, but also as a convenience store, justifying their involvement with tobacco. And they were resistant and had resolutions in 2009 and 2015 omitted. But in a dialogue in 2015, the company indicated there was a shift and said that they had moved their displays and stopped selling cigars and smokeless tobacco. So it came as natural that in 2020, the CEO of the company made an announcement that tobacco will not be a part of the Rite Aid store of the future. So you can see that through shareholder engagement, there is some indication of this evolution in company understanding. And in 2021, when members approached the company to assess the health risks of in-store tobacco sales in the age of COVID-19, the company agreed to do the report requested in the resolution. Just as an engagement tracker can show you an evolution in company response, can also help capture the urgency of an investor ask. I'm going to show you a tracker with Walgreens on opioids. And you see in 2019, a member resolution on board oversight of risks related to the opioid crisis achieved a majority vote. And during the dialogue, members felt that the company covered many internal processes, but offered little board oversight and was reluctant to agree to a report. However, when they refiled following the majority vote in 2020, the investors received the final report, which meets the criteria. But in the same year, they also filed on this issue, asking the company to establish a deferral period for senior executive bonuses. And that resolution was also withdrawn for agreement with the company agreeing to join the bonus deferral working group. That didn't seem to satisfy investors who refiled this year to ensure that this deferral was not just for tax purposes, but also an important part of understanding risks involved with opioids. You can understand the investors' urgency and their effort to come at this issue from different asks. When you read the comment that in 2019, it was reported that at the height of the epidemic, Walgreens handled nearly 1 out of every 5 oxycodone and hydrocodone pills shipped to pharmacies across America. As I mentioned, these engagement trackers and the comments attached to them have been created by ICCR staff, and members will bring a more nuanced understanding and interpretation to this, having been involved in the engagement. So once they have been reviewed and edited by members, I'm sure that they're going to present a more interesting picture. I'm going to pause to see if there are any questions.
Yes, Sahar, there are. Let's see, we have Frank has 2 questions. We'll start there. The first one is, can you say something about confidentiality and member hesitation to report dialogue progress? So that goes back to, we have a lot more data on resolutions and outcomes as opposed to dialogues. And then the second question from Frank is, the tracker score 1 through 4 is based on meeting an investor ask, which is a relative objective. What about the concept of the hierarchy of impact, which is a more absolute measure of progress, similar to the external benchmarks that we already have embedded, which allows us to compare across companies? So first, the dialogue piece, and second, the change from measuring asks away from impact.
Well, ShareEx is only available to ICCR members. So any dialogue notes that are included here are meant to increase coordination, collaboration, and are protected by the membership agreement that our members sign, which states that data privacy is paramount. If we are not able to share the progress, we cannot compare commitments made and be able to hold companies accountable for promises they made during these dialogues. When it comes to the idea of what is causing the hesitation for members to include dialogues, I assume it's more that capturing dialogues is more arduous and not so much the confidentiality. But if it is the confidentiality issue, I hope that members feel more reassured that this data is protected by the membership agreement, and we only need to record what we want to record to capture progress. So the members have some discretion on what they include in ShareEx. Having said that, if we don't include the important bits about what companies committed to, it's hard to understand why the engagement is evolving the way it is. We felt that when we embedded the corporate benchmarks into the shareholder exchange, they would do the heavier lifting in giving us an externally verified, objective benchmark of company progress, which is what I think oversees what we were trying to do with the hierarchy of impacts. The hierarchy of impacts was a little bit difficult for our members to complete, it seemed, when we did the survey. And it felt that that was causing some hesitancy because it was subjective. So we thought that a simpler scale, one that could be applied across programs and would be considered meaningful across programs, would be easier for members to use and to interpret, which is why we are encouraging members to use the benchmarks for more detailed analysis of company progress, but to use the 4-point scale as an internal performance indicator of measuring progress or responsiveness to shareholder ask. I hope that answers.
Yeah, I just allowed Frank you to speak, so you can unmute if you want to further.
I'll just say those are excellent questions. Excellent answers. You answered my questions. Thanks so much. I just think it's a pity, and I'm pointing to myself, that our main go-to tactic is dialogue, yet we don't really record the progress we're making. And so the shame of that is we don't have a learning culture. Others can't learn, and we can't track our own progress as an institution. But I think what you're presenting is excellent, and your answer about the hierarchy and the use of third parties for that part is great. We'll work on our part, which is, kind of setting these milestones or company asks, and when we achieve them, set the next milestone. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Do we have any other questions? Should I continue? Okay. So we've already seen the different ways in which the trackers can be used to consider the impact of all shareholder engagement or actions, to capture the depth of engagement, to track progress in terms of investor support, corporate commitments, corporate resistance, and to capture the changing nature of investor ask and company consciousness. The purpose of the trackers was to make it easier for investors to hold companies accountable by capturing commitments made and highlighting areas of corporate resistance. It was to be able to support a more informed investor engagement. So whether you're a new ICCR member or a new staff at a long-term member, the trackers are sort of your shortcut to understanding the engagement and how it has progressed over time. They also help members capture and report the impact of their shareholder engagement in a more complete and accurate way by including letters, dialogues, and resolutions in one go. And they can help members identify what the areas what their priorities for the next year, what their strategy for the next year should be. How do we envision members using these trackers? Well, in preparing for dialogue, it may be useful when you're going into a dialogue with a company to show that as a coalition, you have been engaging with the company on this issue for X number of years, which establishes your commitment not only to the company as an investor, but to this issue. And given that refilings are an important part of ICCR members' work, the trackers make it easy to understand which asks have been successful, which need to be strengthened to overcome SEC challenges, and which asks have growing investor support and which don't. All these things are important when developing your engagement strategies and priorities for the next year, and also in understanding and communicating your impact. And we did see how the engagement tracker is located on the same page as the benchmarks. It's a means of helping you be able to see how our investors have been able to move the company and how benchmarks think the company is moving on those ESG issues. This table kind of shows you how the three tools that we've embedded in ShareEx, the engagement tracker, the external benchmarks, and the company report cards, how they interact. While all three in some fashion help you track company progress on ESG issues, the engagement tracker through the internal performance indicators, and the company report card in capturing the key takeaways from the dialogues and the withdrawal criteria, and the external benchmarks through that third-party verification. All three of them also in some way help capture the impact of shareholder engagement. External benchmarks can verify that progress made through shareholder engagement actually translated into changes in corporate policy or practice. And we are seeing connections between shareholder advocacy and company progress on ESG issues as measured through external benchmarks. All three are also useful in developing engagement strategies and priorities, as external benchmarks can help you identify leaders and laggards, and company report card and engagement trackers can help you see where investors have had influence and have been able to move companies on issues where there is investor support. However, when it comes to shareholder engagement, it's the engagement tracker and the company report card which really capture the depth of ICCR members' engagement on an issue and are able to track investor support for a specific shareholder ask. Engagement trackers, unlike the other two, are also able to help you understand the changing nature of an investor ask, whether that be because of SEC challenges, because of growing investor consciousness, or company progress. And engagement trackers also help capture all shareholder actions towards a single ask. On the other hand, the company report card shows you the breadth of our engagement across ESG issues. While the engagement shows you depth on one issue, the company report card really shows you across issues. And in terms of where these are on ShareEx, the engagement tracker, as you saw, is on the engagement page. The external benchmarks are just below that on the engagement page, but they're also located on the company page, as is the company report card. In conclusion, I'd just like to say that to date, we've populated over 280 engagement trackers in ShareEx, one for nearly each resolution filed in 2021. These trackers, again, are built on information currently available in ShareEx and can be edited by engagement coordinators who, of course, will bring a more nuanced understanding of the investor ask and company response. We will be hosting a webinar for engagement coordinators in the fall on how to build and edit engagement trackers, and we'll be posting a guide on this in ShareEx, so please keep an eye out for that. For now, I think I'd just like to thank all of you for your attention and stop to take any questions you may have. There's also going to be a short poll on your screen soliciting feedback, so please do fill that out. Thank you so much.
So here we have a couple of questions also after the poll. Sorry, my internet kicked me off.
Sure.
All right, I can tell them. I'll tell you what they are as people complete the poll. So the question was, I think when I got kicked off was, I don't know if you answered this. Will the tracker record what level of support will be needed to resubmit a resolution if the SEC regulations are still in effect?
So we knew about the SEC regulation, which is why being able to show the investor ask as it was in the resolve clause was so important. So you can see whether it's a first filing or a second filing, because you'll see the same wording used. However, sometimes investor asks have changed for the same issue, so you would have to count again for that.
Great. The second one is more of a, I think this is from Frank Rauscher, how to start the engagement tracker. Is it operational now?
Yes, and we will be having a session for engagement coordinators on how to create your own engagement tracker. To create the engagement tracker, it's rather simple. All engagement coordinators will have an edit tool button on their engagement page. And when they click on that, they will be prompted to create the engagement tracker. I can show you a quick preview of that. Let's see if I can. So I'm going to share screen. And here, this edit button allows you to edit the engagement tracker or create one. So this will only appear for engagement coordinators. You can edit each specific one if you felt that this was not really the company committing to make changes, or if you felt there was a dialogue associated with this that you wanted to add, you can press edit here. The engagement ask and the company response are the only places where you have to write anything. All the others are choices from a drop-down. So the meeting year is from the drop-down, the 4-point scale is from a drop-down, and it also shows you all actions that are currently in this engagement, so a resolution or dialogue that's documented, and you just have to select that. And then if there was another one, you would press add another and add another one for that and press submit. And it's as simple as that. You can also delete this. And you can always create a new one. So if you were wanting to create a new engagement task for 2022, you could do that. If you don't have the resolution filed yet, you could type what it needs to be and just come back for the company response at the end of the year and the assessment at the end of the AGM year. Well, we will have a more detailed webinar for engagement coordinators with a chance to ask questions, but this is just a quick preview. We will also be posting a guide on how to do this on ShareEx in the resources section, and that will be referenced in the members bulletin next week.
Couple more, Sahar. The question, here's one about manuals for engagement tracker be posted, sort of like a guide, I guess. When will those be posted? And there will be, will there be templates? It's from Nora. Will there be, Sister Nora, will there be templates that members can use?
Yes, there will be.
Let me see. Couple more that are coming in here. We have a couple minutes left, so I'll get to these. In the engagement tracker, would you also need to add your company's name, the asset manager doing the engagement?
In the engagement tracker, would you also need to add, sorry?
Company's name, yeah. So that you would have to select that, and the asset manager doing the engagement would potentially be the engagement coordinator.
Yes, an engagement coordinator can be one or two or more investors who are in charge of coordinating that engagement. And the engagement coordinator is always listed on the engagement page. So you will be able to see who the engagement coordinator is. A lead filer could be the engagement coordinator, or they may not be the engagement coordinator in some cases. So if you're interested in becoming an engagement coordinator and there is not one available for the engagement that you're interested in leading, you should get in touch with program staff about that, program directors.
Another question is the differentiation between this and the series engagement tracker. So what role does the ICCR tracker play that the database doesn't? And is it more confidential, has more detail around member goals, easier to collaborate? I don't Asaba, I don't know because I got kicked out. I'm not sure who asked this question. So there may be something they want to add. So I don't know if you know who asked it. Perhaps we can unmute them.
Well,
Hi, yes, this is Lucas. That was me who asked that. Yeah, I'm just curious because I've used the series database in the past, and it does seem like this plays some different roles, but that was just on my mind of, okay, if I'm going to try to use both, how should I think about them? That's why I asked that question.
well, it's different for in the sense that this tracks only ICCR members' engagement. It's only the engagement that is either where a member was a lead filer, co-filer, or leading in the dialogue that would be recorded in ShareEx. It's different compared to our other tools because it allows you to follow the journey of one issue with one company over time, and to be able to see that in an easy to read format, almost as if it was the narrative of that story. It's unlike the previous formats where you'd have to go into where all material was organized chronologically and you'd have to go year by year. This gives you an overview of progress made over time. And it also helps connect all shareholder actions, so resolutions, dialogues, letters. And what we're hoping is that it will help us see and map how we are able to move companies forward, not just in terms of resolutions, but also in dialogue. Because whereas it's easy to record withdrawals achieved, number of resolutions omitted, it's hard to quantify progress made through dialogues. And we're hoping that, and letters, we're hoping that this will help us understand that and be able to communicate that, because that is an important part of our members' engagement strategy. And also it will help us capture our impact more holistically.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And one more question from Frank Rauscher. He wanted to know who actually provided input to identifying which external benchmarks are included in ShareEx.
So we did last year, we did an analysis of the benchmarks that our different program areas were using. We were careful to focus on those benchmarks which are related to issues that our members engage on most frequently. So we have 2 climate-related benchmarks, CDP and Transition Pathway Initiative. We have the Corporate Human Rights Benchmark and Know the Chain, which deals with forced labor in the supply chain. Because there's been a lot of engagement with ICT companies, we have the Ranking Digital Rights Corporate Accountability Index. We also have the Access to Nutrition Index, the Access to Medicine Index. And the reasoning for picking these benchmarks was, 1, they relate to the issues our members engage with. 2, they cover companies that our members engage with. And 3, they were considered credible and were being used by our members currently. There is a wish list, a second wave of benchmarks that we heard members would like to be included in ShareEx. For now, we are keeping that in the second round of benchmarks we would include, because we want to make sure that we're able to maintain these. As you can appreciate, just having the benchmarks being relevant and current on a shareholder exchange requires a certain degree of data input. And we want to make sure we don't take on more than we can chew, because if you have benchmarks available, but they are not current, then it's really not very useful for you to really have them there. So we do have, we did a survey when we launched the benchmarks on what other benchmarks members would like to see. And we do have a list in terms of votes and priorities that we will work on once we have the ability to move forward on that.
Great. those are the, you've answered all of the questions that were put into chat. So we just want to kind of open it up. We have 5 minutes left. So if anyone has any other burning questions or comments, feel free to write it in the chat or raise your hand.
Well, we will be in next week's members bulletin. We will be announcing where the guide for building the engagement trackers is going to be. And we want to make sure that members know that whereas we would like members to be able to complete the engagement trackers from 2022 onwards, if you need help in building the historical part of the engagement trackers, we're happy to help with that. So for example, if you're building a tracker with AbbVie on pharma pricing that doesn't exist, you might want to enter the 2022 and then let me know that you would like it populated going back in time. And we'd be happy to help with some of that. So next week, you will know where the guide for creating those engagement trackers is on ShareEx.
So here the poll results are up if you want to walk through those.
So it seems that 80% of the attendees felt that the engagement trackers were very useful and 20% felt they were somewhat useful. 37% feel that the 4-point assessment scale is very easy, while 60% feel that it's somewhat easy. 3% felt it was not easy. So we really thank you for your feedback on that. It's useful for us to know, and we hope that for those who don't find it easy, we can help clarify, because the more you use the 4-point scale, the more useful it is in your own assessments and reporting, the more likely you are to use it in ShareEx. So we hope we can make it easier for you going forward.
And Tahir, can I make one last plug? I think that the utility of ShareEx is immense. I think though, what we do in terms of developing the reports and these tools, it's only as good as the data that's inputted into ShareEx. So to the extent possible where all of you are able to input, particularly as Frank referenced, the dialogues, right, where a lot of the activity happens, there is a section there where you simply need to put the data and you need to write in what the objective was and what the key takeaways are. So it's not, you can upload notes, but minimally to be able to put that in to help feed into the engagement trackers is critically important. So we're here to help, but this is just sort of the first time seeing this type of tool, and we're hoping that it will make it much easier for you to track progress on a particular issue at a particular company. But at the same time, we know that oftentimes there's transition where someone leaves who's been leading with the company on a particular issue, and that has to get transferred to someone else. And these tools make it a lot easier for a person stepping into that role to understand the history of engagement, the asks, and really what the companies have committed to and what changes they've made. So put in the data.
Completely agree. And if we can make it easier for you, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help with that, because we don't want to give a false sense that this progress is achieved through resolutions only, just because we don't see the dialogues recorded in the engagement trackers. So with that, I think we're almost at the hour. Thank you so much, Meg, for all your guidance on this. And thank you everybody for joining us for the launch of the engagement trackers today. We hope you find that.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy the remainder of your day.